you so much for making time in your day, both to our presenters as well as to our students. It should be a lovely presentation, and I'm really excited to have you all here. We're going to start off with introductions, but I'm going to have each of the presenters introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them. We'll go ahead and start with Anne Hoskins, if that's all right. And
Sure.
if you could each take it in turn to introduce yourself, tell us what type of legal job you have right now, and then describe any substantive legal work that you do.
Well, hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you to the Monterey Law School and affiliates. So I have two current jobs in a way, one that I'm paid for and one that I volunteer on. But I think it's interesting to share. And later on in the presentation, I've had a lot of different jobs. But right now, for the last few years, I've been serving for a company called Generac in the position of Senior Vice President for Policy and Market Development. And what that is, I'm not in the legal department, but I use a lot of my legal skills. And the reason I do is we basically do advocacy to Congress, to state legislatures, to state regulatory commissions, largely on energy policy issues, but those very much relate to environmental issues, climate change issues, many issues related to what is happening in the environment around us and what are the impacts from energy. I particularly in my background have worked on renewable energy, so we can talk about that some more. I think some of the other panelists have done that as well. I had led a similar kind of job at a solar company before I came to Generac. But the other position I have that's very interesting, and I use more of my legal skills there, direct legal skills, is I was appointed to serve on a local commission that oversees water quality in the Central Coast. It covers all the way up above Monterey, down below San Luis Obispo. And it's very interesting because that's a position where my job is to vote on proposed rules and also enforcement. So we have lawyers that come before us, we have technical experts that come before us. And as a board member, I need to understand the environmental laws that are being applied to them and then make decisions. So in one role, I'm an advocate, and the other role, I am the one, I guess, being advocated to. So pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Anastasia, are you happy to go next?
Sure, sure. Hi, my name's Anastasia Telesetsky, and I'm here at Cal Poly SLO. I'm a professor in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences with a specialty on environmental policy and law. And so I'm an academic now. I was formerly, and I can talk about this more through the session. I was formerly a practicing attorney. I've worked for a couple different firms in Seattle and in San Francisco. These were litigation firms doing work on behalf of the first firm I worked for. A primary set of clients we had were Native American tribes, and we were representing them on a number of quite interesting subjects, of which you might not say was environmental law, but we were very concerned with treaty rights. And so that was my first professional career. And then I worked for a firm in San Francisco, doing a lot of work with the California Coastal Commission and looking at a variety of issues with Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act and a variety of federal laws, but also California's state environmental laws. And today I'm an academic, and I have the pleasure of teaching undergraduates and graduate students. And my sort of side gig as an attorney right now, which I'd love to talk with you more about, is I've been working with the Society for Ecological Restoration on a thought project of theirs, which has been designing a model law looking at how do we upscale ecological restoration. And these are laws that are being sort of drafted that can be adopted by states, but also by counties or subnational groups also and municipalities. And so we're trying to create something that is generic enough that it would be applicable, but useful enough that it would actually have some outcomes. So it's a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to the rest of this session.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, June.
Great. Thanks, Chelsea. And thanks for the invitation to be here. I think similar to both Anna and Anastasia, I've had a lot of jobs throughout my career, and I dare say that my career is probably longer than either Anna or Anastasia. I think I'm the senior one in the group. And I also have more than one job at the moment, and similarly, one I get paid for and one I don't. But my first environmental related job was really relatively recently. So from April of 2024 to July of 25, I was the community engagement manager for Invenergy's Even Keel Wind project, which is one of the offshore wind farms with the Central Coast here in the Morro Bay wind energy area. With the current administration's feelings about offshore wind, that job ended in July. And so now I volunteer with the Slow Climate Coalition, pretty much doing the same thing I did that I used to get paid for, which is advocating for offshore wind energy, advocating and educating. And then my pay, and so I also provide legal services for the Slow Climate Coalition, and that work is mostly contract related. They've got all sorts of grants and different contracts that I help them with and review and draft those. The paid work that I do is a little bit of everything and not environmentally related. So I still do trademark work for one of my former clients. I had a long stint in sports law, and so I still I'm doing that mostly contracting. So a little bit of everything.
That's great, June. Thank you so much. Thank you all again for being here. And before the meeting, we asked the presenters how they would like to field questions, and everybody is agreed that you can either just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it into the group chat, and then Dean Adams or myself will moderate those questions for you. So I'd like to welcome Dean Isaac Adams, um, who's also moderator on this call, and he's going to be asking some of the questions as well.
Thank you, Dean Wright. So first, I want to thank the panelists for making the time to be here. We are truly honored to have you here. Thank you so much. My question to you is if you could briefly summarize your pathway from law school to the legal practice. And if we may start with Anne, please.
Certainly. So, as I mentioned, I guess we've all mentioned we've had a number of jobs. So I'll try to be succinct here. First of all, I went to law school a little bit later than many of my colleagues in law school. I probably was just about 30. I had worked in I knew I was wanting to be involved in public policy, and I had worked in public policy in a governor's office and an advocacy organization, and that really impacted my focus at law school. But coming out of law school and even as summer associates, different places, I did realize the value of getting some like real legal training in a law firm. I knew it was not where I was going to want to end up, but I was serving in like litigation and antitrust roles for 3 or 4 years until I found my way to supporting companies on some regulatory issues in telecommunications. So totally different topic area, but I then was invited to work in-house. It's now Verizon. It was different companies back then for a number of years, for about a decade, in a legal position as a regulatory lawyer. There are such positions. I was in Washington, D.C., a very interesting time. And then, as that was going along, one of my former colleagues, and this was my main point of recommendation for all of you, is always try to make relationships wherever you are. became the CEO of an energy company, and he invited me to come lead a policy team when there was one of the first go-arounds of climate legislation. It was called the Waxman-Markey Act. It was quite a while ago now. And to try to help that company figure out how to advocate on behalf of that. And that was the transition that really brought me from being in a legal department to being in, a department that was adjacent to legal. In that case, it was policy and sustainability. Later on, it was, I was the chief of policy at a company called Sunrun, a solar company, and now I'm a chief of, the SVP of policy in another company. So it's interesting that I use my legal training, but I'm in these positions that are not considered part of the legal department. One other stop along the way that has been really foundational for me was after I left that first energy company, I was appointed to serve on a public service commission in Maryland, which are the commissions across the country that set energy regulation rates and different, not just energy, water, telecommunications. And I did that for 3 years. And the interesting thing about that for me is, again, I got to see lots of advocates come before me. I saw the need for advocates outside of just the corporate advocates, outside of just the utilities. It really prompted me to look for a position where I could be a different advocate. But the way I got there was, again, I had built some relationships early on and had gotten involved politically. And it was because I had gotten involved politically that I was able to get appointed to that position. And so it's just something, when I look back on my career, it's not that I just sat at my desk. I obviously took my work very seriously, but it was really because of relationships I made along the way that I was able to make these changes, right? And sort of new pathways. And that's what I would encourage, people to think about when you get those first jobs. Obviously, you have to learn the law. I'm glad I learned the litigation. I'm glad I understood what law firms worked like. But it's the other opportunities that, came to me by broadening what I was doing. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. May we go next to Anastasia, please?
Sure. I never planned to be a lawyer. I'll tell you that much. I never planned to be a lawyer. When I was going through university, my passion was really cultural anthropology and literature. And so after graduating from undergraduate, I did a few things, and I found myself in an academic PhD program for cultural anthropology. And I was pursuing that, but there was a class that was offered by one of the instructors on the anthropology of law. And I found it absolutely fascinating. And so I began to pivot in my academic work, thinking, okay, I'd like to really learn a little bit more about the legal profession. And there was an opportunity to do a year of exchange at a law school. So I packed up and I relocated myself to law school, and I took all the first year classes, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. So I did a complete pivot. I requested my PhD program to give me a little bit of time, and I continued forward from the first year to the second year to third year, and was asked by the program, "Are you coming back?" And I said, "No, no, I'm not coming back because I think I've found my profession. I think I've found where my passion lies." And so when I was in law school, and in terms of at least initial opportunities, and what I hope will be some actionable advice for some of you, is when you meet people, wherever they may be in your network, whoever they may be in your network, when you feel a kind of a connection with them, explore that further. And here's where I sort of got my connection into my first sort of legal job. So when I was in my second year of law school, I ended up meeting someone who gave a presentation on, I don't even remember what he gave a presentation on now, something with environmental enforcement and climate change. And I was really taken by this speaker. He was really passionate. He worked with a group called the Center for the International Environmental Law, and they're based out of Washington, D.C. And it turned out that he was going to be on campus for a little bit longer. And at the end of his presentation, he just said, anyone who wants to join me for further conversation, come to this coffee shop. And so I went to the coffee shop, had a fantastic conversation with him, and he offered me an internship. He offered me an internship, and he said, you know what? With your background and your interests, I have some folks who work in Papua New Guinea. We have a project there. Love to have you go and sort of be part of that project. And so I didn't even apply for this internship. There was no application. And the point being, it was this connection you don't know where connections will lead. And so I found myself in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, working with a team. I was the person, there was a lawyer who was based in DC, who this was his project. He didn't have time to be in the field, so I was his field worker. And I was working with a number of other people, including his partners, his law. There were individuals, Papua New Guineans, who were lawyers, and I was working with them to represent the Center for International Environmental Law and to build this partnership. So that to me was it was transformative. It is indeed what I wanted to do with my career. I will, from an environmental perspective, and I think Anne and June might be able to reflect some of this. Getting a job in a nonprofit organization immediately out of law school is very difficult. I'll just leave it at that. It's very difficult because nonprofits don't have a lot of resources. So they don't have the resources for training new lawyers. They like to have seasoned lawyers if they can find seasoned lawyers. So those opportunities can be rare. That doesn't mean that if you have a particular passion, that you shouldn't start your own NGO. That comes with its own challenges, particularly fundraising. But I have seen individuals who are working on particularly biological diversity. Someone from my law school went out, passionate on this topic, created their own nonprofit, and today they're one of the larger nonprofits working in this area. It was not easy. It was not easy, but it was the passion. And so my passion basically took me out of the law school. Most of my peers at the time were going into corporate firms. It was at that time, an easier pathway for many individuals. It was not the pathway I wanted to follow. So I began to look at what were called more boutique firms, of which environmental law can be a boutique subject. Environmental law often goes with land use law. And so that's how I found myself working with the firm that I worked with in Seattle. So they were very different than most of the other people I interviewed with. They were a very small group of lawyers who were very committed, in this case, to representing Indigenous rights and also environmental law. But I just will also say this, if you're going to follow your heart, that's not normally where the money is. And for those that's a priority, I made less as an entry-level lawyer in this small firm than I did when I was teaching English as a second language. So there are sort of those trade-offs. Today, I'm happy I made those trade-offs. At that time, it was difficult. It was difficult. But there are many pathways, and that's my advice to you, is to follow a bit of your passion and be open to your network, and you don't know where the next portal will be.
Thank you, Anastasia. May we hear from June next, please?
Yeah. Quick question, Anastasia. Were you the only one to show up at the coffee shop?
I was.
I'm not surprised, right? People, especially as younger people, are often intimidated to take advantage of those opportunities. I certainly was when I was in law school, but man, you never know where they're going to lead. And people don't extend that kind of invitation if they don't really want you to follow up on it. So take advantage of those opportunities. I want to carry on with both two themes from Anne and Anastasia. One is relationships, and the other is passion. I feel like my path was similar to Anne's, except that I really didn't know why I was going to law school or what I wanted to do coming out of it. And so in my family, we've got differing stories about when I decided to be a lawyer. It was either fourth grade or, like 2 days before I applied. I'm not really sure which, but it was easier in those days to join a corporate firm. And since I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and that was easy path, that's what I did. And so I ended up at a big international law firm, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher in Los Angeles. And it was great training. Like Anastasia says, the smaller firms and the nonprofits have a hard time having the resources to provide training, but the big firms can do that. And so that was a great experience. I have had many passions throughout my career, and the one that hit me early on was I'm a soccer player. I've always been an advocate for women's soccer, and I got an opportunity to volunteer for the '94 Men's World Cup Organizing Committee in the legal department. So I didn't leave my job. I was at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, but I started volunteering, and I did that for almost a year, maybe 9 months. And I was literally a first-year attorney, and it turned out the general counsel was a second-year attorney. We were very knowledgeable. After about 9 months, she called me and said, "Hey, do you want to have lunch?" And I had just been drafting contracts for her. It was getting big enough that she needed someone to come on full time and join the legal department. So I got that opportunity. She clinched the deal when she said she'd match my Gibson Dunn salary. And so I had that great opportunity to follow my passion. And so I did that. And I was vice president legal counsel of the 1994 Men's World Cup Organizing Committee. The relationships I built there led me to that naturally transitioned into general counsel of the new soccer league, Major League Soccer. So I was their founding general counsel. Similarly to what Anastasia said, I knew the World Cup was going to end, so I was a little leery. So I took a 2-year leave of absence from Gibson Dunn, which is the longest leave of absence they've ever granted at that time. And then after a couple of years, they called like, "Are you coming back?" I'm like, "Yeah, no." But from Major League Soccer, we moved from Los Angeles to New York. They decided to move the league. But then I had an opportunity to leave that and join the 1999 Women's World Cup Organizing Committee, which was even nearer and dearer to my heart, having founded the soccer team at my high school and, always been an advocate for that. So I was the chief operating officer for the 1999 World Cup, Women's World Cup. I started out drafting sponsorship contracts, mostly stadium agreements, all sorts of things. But then we hired a legal counsel, and I oversaw the legal department and was doing a lot less on the legal front. That was smashing success, super fun. Came to an end. I had a brief stint where I was trying to found a women's sports television network. Not successful. We couldn't raise quite the $50 million that we needed. We got to about 35, but that wasn't enough to start. So I moved on from there. 2003, I got the opportunity because of those relationships that I had established to be the managing director of the championship venue of the 2003 Women's World Cup, which they moved at the last minute from China to the United States. And we had like 5 months to put on what we had taken 3 years to do the last time. And so that was great. At that point, I had a small daughter, like baby daughter, and I didn't want to raise her in LA. So we moved to San Luis Obispo. Not a lot of World Cup soccer in San Luis Obispo. But my legal background let me transition. And that was one of the reasons I went to law school is I knew it would be a great background to have no matter what I wanted to do. And sure enough, I joined a law firm here in SLO, and I practiced law for 12 years. doing mostly corporate and business transactions for all sorts of companies in our region, and made amazing connections through my clients, through volunteer work for the Chamber of Commerce, from women lawyers, the Bar Association, all sorts of organizations that it was essential to be part of to build a practice, but then I also just built my life through those and my life here in SLO. I did have a feeling, though, that I didn't want to practice law forever. And I started to get an itch that I wanted to run a business. And so I just sort of became aware of that passion that I wanted to do and started just being aware of opportunities. Looked at a few that I saw sort of float past, but didn't quite seem to fit. And then one of my former law partners was needed help. He was buying out one of his partners in the other business he had founded, which was a winery, Telosa Winery. So we're working on contracts late one night. I'm like, hey, we're on the phone. How are you going to run that winery from Napa? You don't live here anymore. He's like, I don't know, commute a lot, I guess. He's like, you should hire me to run that for you. So we did. Knew nothing about running a winery, but I did that for 8 years. And it was, I'm not passionate about the wine business, about wine, but I was passionate about the wine business and running a business. And it was just an amazing, amazing experience. Again, connections and following my passion. So one of the passions that did develop out of that was understanding sustainability. And it's an agricultural business. I wasn't quite a farmer, but I was in a farming business, and just really seeing how we treat the land, how that impacts so much. And so sustainability had always been a priority for Telosa, but under my watch, it became even more so. And it got to the point where I just felt like wine, people gasp when I say this, wine is just not that important. I know. A lot of people feel it differently. But the planet and sustainability is, to me, super important. And so I left the winery so that I could find an opportunity to more directly be impacting the fight against climate change. Didn't know what that looked like. I just left. And then through a lot of intentional networking over the course of 6 months, I made the relationships that led me to the job with Invenergy, with the Even Keel Wind Project, and doing community engagement for them. And then I've already told you that led to my work with the SLO Climate Coalition as well. So like the other two speakers have said, relationships are everything. Maintain those relationships and follow your passion, because that's where you'll be successful, because that's where you'll work the hardest.
I could interrupt for a second. I just have to say, I'm glad I joined on as the speaker here, because you guys have motivated me. Both incredible stories on that. And I have to say, June, that I took my 3 daughters when they were young to the World Cup game in New Jersey, and they wore Mia Hamm, jerseys for, Halloween. So really, just really interesting to hear the pathways that both of you have.
It's so awesome.
Thank you. Yes, incredible pathways for all 3 of you. And the next question's fun, I think. So, what aspects of your work do you enjoy the most, and what aspects do you enjoy the least? And if it's all right, we'll just go in the same order so that everybody kind of knows when to expect to talk, and give everybody a break. So, Anne, what aspects of your work do you enjoy the most?
Sure. So, if we look at my full-time job, at Generac, one of the things that I do enjoy is just kind of digging into the technical elements of energy, which there's been so many developments over the last decade. When I first moved out to California, joined the solar company, that was right before batteries, residential batteries started really taking hold, and seeing the development. Generac is a manufacturer, so being on the senior leadership team to see what it takes to actually build a new battery, and then for me to be able to help guide that to a degree by lots of different, as you probably heard last year, some very unfortunate federal legislation that we tried to advocate against that had to do with tax credits. So understanding that, digging in a little further into tax law, This year, it's digging into tariffs and how those are all changed because as a manufacturer, we are a domestic manufacturer, but import components from all over the world. So it's an area in energy anyway, but I think environmental as well that is just under so much change all of the time. And I think just being able to use my brain, to be able to dig in and understand and then hopefully inform what would be sort of internal clients, but then also influence externally, which is what makes me happiest. One of the achievements that my little team, it's a very small team, had during the Biden administration is we applied and we were awarded 3 major grants to bring distributed solar and batteries to disadvantaged communities in Puerto Rico and in Massachusetts. And then also one out here in California, which is still alive. We're still working on it, which is to put batteries behind generators in water systems, which is really important because it can, if you have an emergency, most water systems do need to have backup generation to make sure that they don't create other challenges and do what they need to do. But if you're running on diesel fuel, it can create air issues. So all of you that have been studying environmental law or environmental policy and some of the air issues, let's say down in the LA area, for instance, having a battery as a backup, an industrial battery, can make huge differences for the welfare of the people around. So those were all really exciting opportunities that I could have by being in a company that had resources, that was willing to let me run with things like that. I think the other thing I've enjoyed is even though it's a small team, I really do enjoy mentoring. I have 3, well, younger than me for sure, women on my team. They all have families. I'm in a different point in my life now. I have 4 now adult children. And, being able to support them, work with them, and learn from them too. But I very much enjoy working with young people. Anastasia kindly invited me to speak to her class last week. I love talking with all of you, wherever you are out there right now, just because, it is really inspiring to see what people who work with you do as their careers develop. I've got some huge success stories that are not really mine, but I'm going to count them as, something in my life that I feel I've had an impact, and that is by helping to mentor people who are earlier in their careers and let them follow their passions. The part that I don't like as much is when you are in a corporation or really when you're in any job, unless you're working for yourself or like June and can create all these amazing opportunities, you're representing that client, and so, as the sort of lead policy person, right, for a major organization, major company, if I see something happening in the world, of which there are many things right now that I may not be that comfortable or happy about, I don't feel free to give my opinions publicly. And I'm an advocate, right? So there's a tension that I face with that because, I got into this because I want to impact the world in a positive way. But when you do join a law firm or you join a company or even a nonprofit, you are there at service of that organization. You can try internally to raise concerns if they are doing something, and I will try to do that. But that's not the issue. It's more what can you do externally? And I think that it's something that is a challenge sometimes for lawyers, right? I mean, because you do have, and even really, or any leader in an organization, you have an obligation to the organization. So I'm fortunate that the organizations I've worked for, I think, are all, very ethical, and, that is very important to me. But it's really more, what do I feel comfortable doing externally of that because of the role I'm in. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Anastasia,
I'll,
what what do
I'll
you
start with the
enjoy?
challenge first, and then I'll
Okay.
move to talking about what I really love about the legal field and particularly the environmental field. I think one of the challenges is work-life balance, and that's something that the whole legal field has had to take, I think, a sharp look at. Just the nature of sort of how our legal opportunities and legal professions are built. There's a lot of deadlines, there's a lot of pressure. It's very difficult sometimes to disentangle yourself. And so, from that perspective, I know I worked in firms, and I'll be honest, that's why I'm now an academic. Because I did two all-nighters in 1 week to meet some court deadlines that were imposed at the last minute. And I said, I can't do this. My body can't do this. And so that's something to keep in mind, that you may find yourself in your profession having different chapters depending on your stamina at a given point. Which is, I'm going to go back to that firm life, because much of what I liked also, why would I work that hard, is because of two reasons. One, lifelong learning. One of the things that when you're working on these kind of legal problems, you find yourself, they're puzzles, they're things to figure out. There is no right answer per se. There are many answers and many pathways. And that's one of the things that's actually quite exciting, is trying to figure out in this moment, what kinds of recommendations do you want to offer? What strategy are you going to take? So it's very engaged. And one of the things that I do appreciate when you're working is there is what I like about the legal profession is there is a lot of agency on a particular problem that you're working on. You feel that you can make a contribution. Related to that, you can make a contribution in people's lives. And so this is not an environment. I have worked on environmental justice cases in the past. But this is an example that resonates with me. When I was in law school, I represented two individuals who had made their way to the US from Tibet. And they had incredibly compelling stories, and they were filing for political asylum. And those two individuals, I did not expect my life pathway to cross their life pathway. And yet, I think all of us are happy that our paths crossed. That was something that I was able to make a contribution in two individuals' lives to make their life better. And today, these people are flourishing here in the US, doing great work in their communities, doing service work. So I think that's one of the things when you go into just the career of law, you can make a difference for others, and that you will also get reward, not just from doing that service, but also the learning. There's always the learning. And so today, yes, I like learning. I'm back at the university again. But it doesn't matter what profession you choose, you can always be learning. So
Thank you, Anastasia. And June, whichever order you'd like to answer.
Yeah, I think my thoughts have already been expressed in both by Anne and Anastasia. I think the challenges and the parts I like best have evolved and flip-flopped and changed over the years. When I first started practicing law, like being in a law firm, I was always in the beginning really nervous, like meeting new clients, talking to people. I'd rather just be like at my computer drafting or researching, because I felt like I was expected to have all the answers. And that was really uncomfortable because I didn't have them. And the longer I practiced, I realized I'm not expected to have the answer right off the bat. It's fine to hear people's stories, to hear what their issues are. And actually, that is listening rather than trying to provide answers is the way to serve your clients. And so I became much more comfortable with that. I became much more comfortable with what Anastasia was just talking about there isn't one right answer. My personality is, what's the answer? And so I was always trying to feel like I had to have the answer, and realizing there isn't one answer. How can I best help this client? It's very individual to their situation, to what we can come up with together. And so I became much more comfortable with that sort of like ambiguity and the not knowing the answer and finding an answer. And so now, whereas I prefer just to be like head down on my computer, drafting and researching, now that's more the agony part. So I'm like, oh, sitting in front of my computer and really just being out with people and talking to them about their issues and what's going on and having that exchange of ideas is something I'm just so much more comfortable with now at this point in my career and just enjoy so much more. And then to reiterate what both of them said too, like that learning new things, that lifelong learning. Um, clearly I've had to learn, like I had to learn about sports and I had to learn about wine and learn about energy, but even just representing clients, you being in a law firm for 12 years, each client is in a different business and learning about their business and what their issues are and diving into those was always super interesting and really fascinating. And that's what they say keeps you young and wards off dementia. So I feel like I got that down. I'll always be looking to learn something new and digging deep and really trying to master some new subject matter. I didn't know anything about energy 2 years ago. And I still I know a little bit now, but it's been fascinating and just be able to dive in and learn what I can and continue to learn is really fun.
Thank you, June. And my next question to the panel is, if you could go back and speak to your law school self, what advice or words of encouragement would you share and why? And if we may start with Anne, please.
Sure. So we've covered some of it, but I'll try to come up with something more. As I said, I went back to law school when I was close to 30, and it was a full-time law school, a large law school class. I think we had 500 people in our class, and a very traditional approach. And, I was a little nervous. I hadn't been in school for 5 years, 5 or 6 years. I had gone to grad school right under undergrad, but I had been out working for 5 years. And I feel like I really did, dig in to the books, which I'm not saying not to do that since we have all these deans and presidents on the phone here. But, I could have done more. I think I could have done more to engage with the opportunities. The law school is part of a major university. I probably could have taken classes in other parts of the university. I could have tried to build more relationships. I felt as though I was like, I lived off campus. There are a lot of people lived on campus. And again, because it goes back to the fact that I mean, this is, one person said, going to law school, it's like your Rolodex of the future, right? You build these relationships because you're deeply going through something, which I'm sure the students will agree. I mean, you're going through stressful situations together, right? You're taking on challenges, you're learning in a new way together, and that's going to build really strong bonds, but you have to maintain them. And I do try to go back now to reunions. I've tried after the fact to meet some people that I should have met at the time. So that's one of my suggestions is, to the extent you can, I know, many folks are working during the day and you're doing this amazing thing and going to class at night. So, I had, I guess maybe, an easier situation. I was just doing it full time, but it is something I look back on like, gee, I wish I had tried to take a little more time to get to know some of the people who maybe I thought were too young for me at the time. It's silly, right? Like they're 22 and I'm 30, but that's kind of a big difference at that point in your life. Um, so that's kind of, one of the things I look back. Now, one of the best things I did there, which is where I put some of my time, is I got involved in moot court and was on a team and we ended up winning and it was, really quite exciting. That's why I thought maybe I would go into litigation, which again, I didn't do. But, finding, whether, it's an activity like that or a clinic, kind of what Anastasia said, those are other opportunities where you're going to build your skills, but you're also really, I mean, those are my closest friends. The few, some of the ones that I did that moot court process with it, happened over the course of like 2 years. So you did have to get to know people again, doing an all-nighter with them to try to get the brief done, all of those things which were tremendously painful at the time are the kind of things that kind of, build a bond that you can then see somebody 20 years later and you're like, oh yeah, do you remember when we did that? So I would encourage you to the extent you can do that, if you can find an activity at the law school that speaks to you, that you can carve out some time for, you will find, in the future, that'll be something you'll look back at and say, gee, I'm glad I found time to make that happen.
I was going
Thank
to
you
say,
very much. Yeah. Go ahead, Anastasia, please.
my bit of advice for folks is just savor the present. Stop worrying about the future. There's a famous Mark Twain quote, that, he worried about all the things that never came to pass. And I think we're sort of prone to do that. And I think I missed out on some of the joy of the whole process. Because I was worried about jobs and I was, worried about outcomes. And so I think that's a bit of advice just to think about going through the process. Because at the end of the day, we all end up the same place. And so it's all about the journey. And so to the extent that you can focus on what are those things that interest you in a class and digging a little deeper and asking more questions instead of thinking of it as I did at times as a very sort of functional experience. And so I feel that that's what I would say to myself if I had that time travel again, to say, just enjoy the journey.
Thank you, Anastasia. June, may we hear from you, please?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've already talked about, building relationships. I think it is. Some people, when they're young, are naturally outgoing and going to do that anyway. But it's one of those things. It's a skill set that you build, that you learn, and you got to put yourself out there and sort of take the risk of meeting someone new or going to coffee with a speaker because they say, come on out, and taking advantage of those opportunities. I do think the reason I went to law school and it is proven true, and I think it'd be true for a lot of people, is it opens doors. It's a great background to have. It teaches you how to think, really, more than actual laws. Like, those change all the time, so you got to be able to look them up. So it's really more how to think and how to approach the world, and so to really embrace that, and then put yourself out there at all points of your career. Volunteering is such a great way to make connections. It's always something additional to do. You probably have a busy job, but that's how opportunities have really come my way. Because when you volunteer, people get to know how you work and how you think without any risk, right? They don't have to hire you and then maybe have to fire you or whatever. They get to chance to see how you work for free. And really, you get in there, you work hard, you build connections, and those almost always lead to something, whether it's a job or a great friendship or a great learning opportunity. I've never had a volunteer experience that I've like, well, that was a waste of time, right? So I really encourage that. And then always be on the lookout for opportunities. Opportunities are there, and explore them. You never know where they're going to lead, and maybe they don't lead anywhere, but seize them. I mean, for me to say to my partner, hey, you should hire me, I mean, that's bold, one might say, maybe foolish. And he laughed at me when I said that. And but he sobered up. He's like, I guess I just need someone I can trust. And so, that led to a great 8-year career running a really fun business. So seize opportunities, explore opportunities. They're out there.
Thank you, June. Now I want to open up the floor for any questions from the students.
And
If you
for
don't-
any attendees, you're welcome to put your question in the chat, or if you'd like, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand or use your excuse me, virtual raise hand, and the moderators will call on you.
Okay. So we have one question, which is any advice or insight to get into land use and zoning area? Whomever wants to take this question, please go ahead.
So I think in terms of long-term professional work, there's many ways that you can explore land use and zoning. And one of the ways is um, interacting with the cities, interacting because it is cities that are making most of these decisions. One way just to sort of inform yourself about some of the process is to go to the city council meetings and see what goes on. But going from there, seeing who the players are, because typically cities have a handful, depending on the size of the city, a handful of firms and individual attorneys who do that type of work. You can also approach groups such as, developers themselves to see how you might be able to contribute to some of their development projects. They're typically working with an attorney. Or there are groups like the Urban Land Institute that also do work on a variety of kinds of development, more of what they term smart development, which might be more sustainable development practices for land use. And so those are a kind of a handful of things that you might be able to check out. But I would start looking in cities, and I'd go reach out to folks in the city who are responsible on the legal team for supporting some of the work that they do for things like general plans.
I would just add to that, in addition to going to city council meetings, go to planning commission meetings, right, where they're really getting into that nitty-gritty.
Thank you both. And I think we have a follow-up, and the follow-up says, any bar association to reach land use? Could you clarify that, Bess? What do you mean by that?
What I mean is there any specialty bar association that I can reach more land use and zoning lawyers and network with them?
So there's the American Bar Association has different sections, and I know that they have a section on environment, energy, and natural resources, which would cover some of these land use questions. The good news is that students have a really, really reduced rate, really reduced rate. And so I'd encourage you to look on the American Bar Association website. They have a lot of webinars and other events that are available, as well as sometimes even conferences that you can attend and meet folks.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. I know you might need to jump off early because you've got to teach a course right now. So before you go, just wanted to say a really big thank you to Anastasia for her time and contributions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia.
And for our other panelists, we have the question, as a current volunteer of Monterey Bay Aquarium, what advice or insight on environmental law? Sorry, Chris, what did you mean? What advice or insight regarding what specifically?
Thank you for that. What I mean is, like, because of our theme of like conservation and plastic pollution, what insight would you give advice for us as like volunteers? Because I kind of missed on the first half. What would you give us as students or volunteers? Would you give us insights of just basic environmental laws, or just kind of like how to approach that, whether plastic pollution, just in general, how would we approach that on the oceans, and how to approach that as a volunteer like that,
What's your volunteer role?
We as interpretations, so we protect, as you're probably aware of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So what are ways can we, as aware of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, as motto is conservation of the oceans and plastic pollutions and conservation. So what are ways can we do to apply to environmental laws of the ocean, for instance, of plastic pollution conservations, and what are ways can we apply to that to the environmental laws? So that's why I was kind of try to interpret that. So
Because the Monterey Bay Aquarium is such a leader in ocean
Mhm,
conservation and ocean research and all that you are in
mhm,
a fantastic place to, as we were
mhm.
discussing, like make as many connections and relationships as you can, because the work that they are doing at the aquarium and in their research arm is fantastic, and they do so much policy and advocacy that if you can get to know the folks that are actually doing that work, and again, they'd probably be more than happy to talk to you. One of the best tools you can use is an informational interview. Right, you're already there working there. If you can sort of go in their staff directory and figure out who's doing that work and just say, hey, can I have 20 minutes of your time to learn about what you do? Guaranteed you'll get a good response rate on that.
Could just
Thank
add one other recommendation, which is outside of the aquarium. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the Central Coast Water Quality Control Board. It's kind of a mouthful, but it covers the area that includes includes Monterey and the Monterey Aquarium area. And many of the cases that we deal with essentially have to deal with releases into waters of the U.S., right, which is the ocean and tributaries and things that lead into that. And there's a lot going on in the region. There's a lot
Mhm.
going on from the agricultural area that surrounds Monterey that impacts the groundwater, impacts some of the streams. There's a lot going on with desalinization in your area. And all of those issues have a lot of legal elements to them. And so there are certainly stakeholder environmental organizations who get involved in looking at that. There's also farming interests that are involved in that. And then there's also a number of different sort of protect the bay type
Oh,
organizations specifically. So, in terms of if that's an area of interest of yours, I can tell you, there are lots of organizations that are working on water quality, and it could be something interesting for you to look at. And, there's a website where you can go and read all sorts of information, lots of data that's available that different entities that are under these restrictions have to support. And so you can learn a lot just from even looking at the website.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have one more question, I think, before we conclude. And the question is from Joey. Joey says, would the option of working internationally benefit a person who is interested in domestic environmental issues? How much overlap is there between domestic and international environmental issues? So anyone from the panel who feels comfortable answering this question, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
I didn't, well, I once had an opportunity as a regulator in Maryland to get to do some international energy work, which was fascinating. I think it's unfortunate Anastasia had to drop off because clearly she took that experience that she had early on and put it to bear. In the area of sustainability and climate, there's actually a lot more going on in Europe, in Australia, than there is here right now. I mean, there's still a lot going on. Again, lots in the States, not as much, at the federal level. But I was just on, at Generac, we have a sustainability organization. I was just on the planning call on that before I got on here, and we were looking at the different rules that are taking effect earlier in the European Union, having to do with climate disclosure. Well, a lot of it's disclosure, and that whole area of sustainability is largely about disclosure. And so companies and others will say what they're doing and have targets to reduce the impacts. So I would say anything that you're doing, in other parts of the world could certainly give you experience that you could apply back here.
Thank you, Anne.
I would reiterate that, being in offshore wind, that industry has been so seriously fettered here in the United States, but it's going strong elsewhere. And so whether it's legal issues or technology issues or anything else with it, what's going on in the rest of the world will be directly applicable here in the United States eventually.
Thank you, June. Dean Wright, do you have anything else before we conclude?
No, just a really big thank you to all of you, especially Anne and June, for coming and giving us your time and your experience. Really appreciated. And thank you to all of the students who have made time to be here today as well.
Thank
Thanks so
you,
much for
Anne.
having me.
Thank you, June. Thank you, everyone who attended. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Have a good
Well,
day.
thank you everyone for attending, and we'll be sharing this video on our YouTube page once it's ready. And again, thank you to the panelists and the moderators, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Exploring Careers in the Law panel discussion.
I think it's an amazing opportunity to have local practitioners, judges, attorneys as the faculty of the law school, because you're able to network and build those connections. When I graduated and passed the bar, I had a couple of job offers waiting for me.